All right, welcome to Magic in the Ordinary. Today it is my joy and privilege to welcome renowned keynote speaker, author of multiple books, and man with a powerful story, Greg Mayo. So, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on. This is going to be a lot of fun today. I can't wait.
It's going to be great. Can you start just by sharing your backstory with your background with the audience?
Well, I've been writing freelance for publications ever since I got out of high school. I, I, I wrote my first novel when I was 39, um, and I've written and published four more books since then. So that's kind of the writing background. But the other, pretty common. I grew up in the Midwest, Central Indiana. Um, Parents divorced, like a lot of people my generation, right? And Yeah, I traveled around for a while, did a lot of different jobs, like a lot of creatives do. We can't find a job that makes sense. We just need something to support our creative endeavors. But yeah, now at 50, when the last novel came out, things really changed. And the calls to speak and the questions and the interviews and all that really amped up in a way that I never anticipated. But I think it's a lot about what that book has to do with, which I think we'll talk about probably here in a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, that sounds great. So I'll start with saying why did you start writing, I guess? You mentioned starting like right out of high school.
Well, I started writing secretly. I call it writing and hiding. Um, when I was probably in junior high, and I started writing songs and poems, and we had a class on poetry, and I just found it fascinating. The way the words sort of flowed and were sing-songy, and the kind of quality of it,
Mm.
and so I wrote for myself, and I journaled and all those kind of things, and but it was my at the end of my sophomore year in high school, and the short version is I had spoken at a town meeting
Right.
inadvertently. It was about kids and cruising, and I got up and spoke, and afterwards, the high school journalism teacher introduced herself, and she said, "I'd love to have you on the paper next year." And I'll be honest, my first thought was, "No, I'm not one of those journalism kids." And so I said, I would, but I can't change my schedule for next year. It's already too late. And she said, "Oh, so if I could change your schedule, then you would be on the paper." And I went, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So she got my schedule changed, kind of tricked me. But here's what got me. In my first year, I did, I don't know, 8 or 10 stories. And then my senior year, she gave me the job of news editor. And I wanted to write something that mattered. And so I came out of the gate, first issue, above the fold for people in the print publication business. Um, Story was on date rape,
Whoa.
and I had interviewed a lot of women, a lot of cops, a lot of different folks, counselors. Here's
Whoa.
what happened when that story hit: a couple different things. Number one, parents were calling the school saying that really doesn't happen in our town, blah blah blah, that kind of thing.
Oh.
And the other thing that happened was the sheer volume of girls in school that came up to me in the halls crying, saying, "Thank you so much for telling my story."
Oh my gosh.
I realized at that moment that writing had power,
Okay.
that somehow I could tell a story in a way that was powerful to people and that would help people. And from that moment on, I got to be honest, I was hooked.
Wow. That's incredible. I think this is a good time to just jump in. You want to tell us a little bit about what your books are about, your current books?
Well, so my first novel I wrote when I was 39,
Yeah.
and it actually stemmed from a short story I'd written.
Okay.
I had heard a news story about a family that got in an accident with the drunk driver, and everybody in the van except the dad was killed. And I was a new Christian at that time, and I remember thinking, how do you get up the next day? You right? If you're the dad. And so I wrote this short story, kind of trying to flush out the ideas and
Yeah.
feelings around it. Well, anyway, it went in a desk drawer, and I looked at it about 5 or 6 years later, and I read it, and I thought, I got more to say about this.
Hmm.
And it ended up being a full-length novel, sort of exploring why bad things happen to good people and
Wow.
where is God in our tragedy and those kind of ideas. Um, And then, just like many times in my life and for many creatives, life got busy and I didn't write anything else. Um,
Mm.
I didn't write any other books until about 10 years later.
Wow.
And that's when I wrote Almost Daddy, the forgotten story you see behind me.
Hmm.
That came out. Um, it, born out of my own story of abortion loss.
Wow.
And I didn't want to write a memoir because, nobody reads memoirs by guys in Indiana. Um, so I wrote a novel.
Hmm.
And here's the funny thing. The first novel, that did okay. I spoke at a few churches and, it was just kind of whatever. And I wrote this one really for my own benefit and also to reach other men. By the time I wrote the novel, I had already been speaking at different kinds of meetings and churches and whatever about men and abortion. And so I wrote the novel to reach other men. And when I sent it, and I tell this to people all the time, be careful. Because when I sent it off, I looked up at the ceiling of my office, the room I'm sitting in right now,
Whoa.
and I said, all right, God, this is the best story I could tell. Do with it whatever you want. I'm all in.
Wow.
You got to be careful when you say that to God, right?
He'll say great and he'll just run with it. Like,
Right.
wow. I'm kind of I'm blown away by how you're willing to tackle just intense topics. And it sounds like from day one, when you're willing to tell the stories of these girls and you're willing to share that, I think that's not always easy for writers to do, to like to share something, I don't know, more intense, but I think that's really cool that you've jumped into that. Do you have any tips for new writers who are starting to think, what do I want to write about? Or how do I get into this?
Yeah. The first thing is write, like literally every day, write. I
Yeah.
don't care what it is. If you look out your window and you just start writing, it's sunny, but I know it's cold. There's snow still on the ground. I don't care. Just start writing because a lot of it's just practice. A lot of it is getting used to your voice in your head. We all have a voice in our head when we're writing,
Yeah.
telling a story. And the other thing is, whatever you write, make sure it's true,
Okay.
not real, but true. Fiction is some of the most true things you'll ever read,
Oh, I
right?
love
Nonfiction may be
that.
real, but fiction is more true. And if you write what makes sense to you and
Okay.
you write it in as true a fashion as you can,
Yes.
don't worry about it being polished. Don't worry about it being perfect. Don't worry about every word, right? You go back and you edit, right? That's what the editing process is for. And so allow yourself, with that first novel, Finding Forgiveness, when I got done with it, I
Yeah.
scrapped the first 8 pages and then added 16 more.
Whoa.
So it's really just about writing. And here's the thing I didn't understand. When I was 20, I moved out west and I was telling people my goal is I'm going out there and I'm going to write a novel.
Oh.
And I didn't. And I didn't because I didn't think I knew how to.
Oh.
But it turns out it's not these people put out these books and courses on, how to write a novel and how to do this and how to do that.
Hmm.
You just tell a story and you tell the most true story you can. And before you know it, you've got 308 pages.
Wow. I feel like though those doubts, like you're like, how do you tell a story? I think that does get a lot of creatives where they're like they sit down, they want to write, but they feel like they can't write how they want to is one way. Like they're like I write stuff down, it doesn't sound the way it does in my head, or um, you know, they feel like they're not qualified to tell the story. Do you have any kind of words of advice for writers who find themselves in this boat of struggling to actually to write?
Yeah. So the most important thing, and this is going to sound all hokey pokey to people, but the most important thing is to trust your voice.
Mm,
And I guarantee writers that are struggling, they do not trust their voice. They
okay.
think it's got to be this or it's got to be that or it's got to be whatever. I read a lot. I still read a lot. I don't read a lot of fiction though, but
Mm,
I prefer to write fiction.
okay.
Um, Now I'm very fortunate. My father was an incredible storyteller. He
Okay.
just had the gift, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I learned a lot by osmosis just by being around my dad and my stepdad and his family and listen to all the uncles sit around and tell stories, as a little kid,
Yeah.
but it when I would get hung up and like with Almost Daddy, I honestly I kept telling myself every time I think about it, I'm like, well, you're not really qualified to write this. This is way too big. This is way too important. Now, what happened to me is in 18, I had a routine outpatient procedure that landed me in the ICU for 4 days and lost a lot of blood, almost bled to death.
Oh
And
my,
I was laying in the hospital bed and I was thinking, when my sons walked out one evening, I thought, what's my legacy?
wow.
I've got to tell this story, right? And I'm not trying to be all dramatic, but and so I just sat down and started writing it. And I'll tell you something else. When you start, you have to give yourself the freedom to let the story change. Um, Almost Daddy, about two-thirds of the way up, if you looked at the outline going like this, the story
Mhm.
goes whoop, and and that's when you know when you're in that sweet spot when you sit down to write and you're no longer directing the story or the characters are telling you what they're doing next.
Ooh, I like that. That's when it's good. Wow. Um, I love that. So it's about trusting your own voice, writing down what the story you have, and letting
Mhm.
the characters do what they want, even if they go off script, so to speak, or they completely decide to ignore your outline that you've created nicely. Um,
Yeah.
um, it feels not as much like then the writer's not as much in control, but it sounds like it's comes out with a beautiful story at the end. What's your favorite part?
Well, and
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, one other thing about that process, I see a lot of young writers get hung up on the outline. I
Mm,
used to. You have to understand that the outline is a very loose framework, and you have to give the story room to breathe within that. It, Almost Daddy, it's 308 pages in a
wow.
6x9 trade paperback, right?
Mhm.
I had a page and a half outline, and I still didn't stick to it. I just, I just needed a rough idea where the story was going. And then once I trusted the story enough to let it breathe, that's when it really started hitting on all cylinders for me.
Hmm. I also like your idea that the characters are telling you the story. For me, as a writer, that like I like having that experience of feeling like I'm not the one who's orchestrating things. I'm more like a news reporter who's just trying to follow characters and kind of say what
Hmm.
they're doing. And I feel like that kind of helps do that authentic stories like you're talking about, like telling the truth. It kind of is like saying the truth about what you see these characters, how you see these characters unfolding. It kind of ties into that, saying something true. So I love that. What is your favorite part about being an author?
Oh, it's the telling of the story. When
Okay.
you get done with the story and you look at it and you realize, this turned out like I wanted. This is what I wanted to say.
Wow.
That's terrific. The other thing is when it resonates with other people.
Okay.
And when, just like that article in high school, right? When you
Yeah.
write anything that touches somebody else, that moves them to think, or, you
Yes.
know, God willing, with the kind of stuff I write that moves them closer to God or closer to healing or closer to whatever, then you feel like you've done something that sort of transcends whatever existence I have, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It becomes its own thing to that person. I've had so many interviewers ask me to interpret what Ben, the protagonist in Almost Daddy's doing, and I ended up turning it around and asking them questions. What does the story
Oh,
say to you, right?
okay.
I know what I wanted to tell. What are you reading? What are you getting from it? Who do you think
Whoa.
Ben is?
Oh, I love that. I love that. So then
And
on the
when you
flip,
can,
uh-huh.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say on the flip side, what's the hardest part of being an author? Like,
Um, well, and this is true, I think, in any facet of life, but it's what expectations you carry.
ooh, I could see that.
And that's one of the hardest things, and it's been one of the biggest things for me. Um, Almost Daddy's won awards. I speak all over the country. I speak virtually, internationally.
Yeah.
It's been translated into Spanish. It's getting ready to be in German, all the
Oh,
things. And in pro-life circles and at pro-life events, I'm recognized by a lot of people, and you think, okay, that means things are going like they should, and I'm very thankful and I'm very blessed.
yeah.
But I realize now that when I published it, I had expectations that aren't how it's worked out.
Oh,
Um, and that's the toughest part. As a writer, you have to eventually kick the story out of the nest, right? You craft it, you create it, you envision it, you love it, you nurture it, you grow it. At some point, you got to put it out there in the world and let it be what it's going to be and trust that the people that need to read it is the book's going to find its way to them.
wow.
But
Wow.
isn't that true with life? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking about like it's like children, I think, when or like students, when you're like you have to help them along, and at some point you send them off to college, and it's kind of a similar pattern there of just being like you have to go
oh
be
yeah,
free. Um, but I think that's really good to keep in mind, like expectations across the board. I'm like at the time of recording this, I'm actually getting ready, like getting my story ready to launch. I think by the time it airs, it's going to be like my first book will be out, will have been out for like a week or so. Um, and I actually, it's a little scary because I was like, now other people are going to be reading it. And I don't know why, like, I wanted that obviously, but I think that it's kind of nice to be reminded at this point of like expectations and like, what do I want? And then also what does God want with that story? And that might not be the same thing, but it might be. And so just kind of letting that go is so I think that's such a good reminder. I have a question. Like, how do you deal with haters if you have any haters? Like, if people don't like your story and you're like, it's out there in the world now, what do you do with that?
um, so I think so. I'm 56 years old now,
Okay.
and I was just telling one of my sons the other day if I would have released Almost Daddy or any book and
Yeah.
had the level of um, performance out of the book and so forth that I do now, if that would have happened to me at say 30, I
Hmm.
would have handled the haters a lot different. But there's one thing about time and wisdom and growth, and I haven't arrived anywhere yet, but I'm further along on the road than I was 26 years ago. And so it doesn't really bother me all that much. I get death threats because of the subject matter of the book. Um, I get what I published an op-ed in Newsweek around the topics that are in the book 3 years ago now, I guess. They've since taken down the comments section, but there were 2,400 comments, and most of them were some of the most vile, hateful stuff you've ever seen.
Oh my gosh.
Um, and I mean, at this point in my journey, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. But the thing that I didn't anticipate, writing about men and post-abortion healing and those kind of things,
Yeah.
how abortion loss affects men, I knew I would get hate from people that are pro-abortion.
Hmm.
What I didn't expect is the amount of hate I get from people in the pro-life world
Mm.
who are not pro-healing. They want people involved in abortion, the mother and the father, put in prison, and
Oh my
I've
God.
heard firing squads. And I've had people say to me that claim to be Christians, there is no healing after abortion. It's an unforgivable sin,
Oh,
and all those kind of things. So that kind of hate bothers me because I know that 1 in 5 men and 1 in 4 women will experience abortion loss in the U.S.
yeah.
That's a hard and fast stat, right?
Wow.
And so when I see that kind of shame and hate coming from people who claim to represent Christ, I think this is why so many men, especially, suffer in silence. This is why they don't find relationship
Oh
back
my
to God
gosh.
or healing. So on a personal level, for me, I could care less. 55 years old. What are you going to do to me? But for the people that are still alone and isolated in their pain, it really bothers me, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yes. Because I think, especially with your stories, what you're doing is you're giving a voice to people who have had similar experiences. And that seems to be a trend in your writing, is you're giving voice to the pain, and you're like giving almost an invitation to healing through these stories, watching
Hmm.
these things happen. And so then the haters aren't just towards the author necessarily, it's also impacting the people who you're giving voice to, or it could potentially impact those people. Um,
Absolutely.
wow. Um, so do you want to, if someone has gone through this kind of grief, do you want to say a couple of words to like how do you start the healing process? What resources are out there?
Yeah, okay. Let me share how my journey started, and then I'll speak to that
Yes.
more directly if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I had two abortion experiences in my life, one at 18, and I didn't enter healing for 21 years.
Okay.
And the way it happened was by accident. I was in a book study at my church with a bunch of guys. The book had nothing to do with abortion, by the way, nothing. And the word's not even in the book. And one night during the study, this voice in my head went, "Hey, share that abortion story." And I believe that voice was the Holy Spirit. And I said, "No, we're not doing that." And the voice said again, "No, seriously, dude, you need to share that story right now." And so now I'm arguing in my head with the Holy Spirit. You ever done that? I do it all the time. And I'm like, "Listen, I'm not doing this. I go to church with these guys. I know these guys. There's no way they don't talk
Oh,
about abortion. I'm not talking about it." And finally, the Holy Spirit said, "Dude, do it now." And when he's mad he calls me dude. And so I did. I shared it. By the end of the night, out of I don't know, 14 or 15 guys in the room, three other guys shared their story that they had never shared. So the reason I share that is because for 21 years I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only man that had any feeling about it at all. That night I found out that wasn't true. Now that was almost 17 years ago. I tried to find books. I met with my pastor every week. I met with a counselor. I worked through the books, and so it was a really herky jerky process for me because I was kind of making it up as I went. Right
mhm.
now, when I think about what I went through, both in isolation and then learning how to heal, what I think about for somebody now who's listening, say to this conversation and thinking,
Wow.
okay, I need to get healing. What do I do?
Yeah.
The first thing is to do the first thing. And what I always say is this is what worked for me. So I don't know what anybody should do. I just know what worked for me.
Okay.
I know what I've learned and what I think I know today. The first thing I would do is find someone to talk to.
Yeah.
If you're in a church, a pastor, a priest, a deacon, a lay leader, if you're not, um, somebody you can trust, a close friend, if you want to reach out like through my website to me, I'd be happy to talk to you. I get a lot of guys that hear me on random podcasts and shows that email me through my website and they're like, "Well, what do I do?" Well,
Wow.
the first thing I need is context. Let me know where you're at, right? Where are you at in your, well, it was 20 years ago, or this one guy reached out to me. He saw me on a Christian men's podcast and he reached out to me through my website
Mhm.
and he said, "Hey, I know you don't know me. I heard you on the show. Do you have time to talk?" And I responded, "Thanks for reaching out. Absolutely. When do you want to talk?" He said, "Can you talk now? Here's my cell number." So I called him. His girlfriend had just had the medication abortion, the chemical abortion,
Oh my goodness.
um, like like a couple days before.
Oh,
And um, it was one of the hardest calls I've ever had. He was in the background, or he was on the phone, and she was in the background laughing at him for crying and being upset.
oh,
Um, his journey and kind of where he and I walked was a little bit different than the guy that reached out to me at a conference in Seattle, whose abortion story was 40 years ago.
yeah. Wow.
So I know it sounds like I didn't really answer your question, but I mean, that's really, we have to talk. I got to figure out where you're at. And so if you and I aren't going to talk, whoever you is on the other end of this thing,
Right.
that's fine, but find somebody to have the conversation with.
Okay.
And I believe that when we prayerfully consider and ask God, what's next for me? What do I do now? If we allow ourselves time, excuse me, to sit with that prayer and actually wait for the answer, the next step will be revealed. You may meet with me for 10 or 12 weeks. We may go through my recovery guide, which is 15 weeks, and then you may get in touch with something else and so then you're on to the next thing. Or
Mm.
I've had guys go through my 15-week study and then they go do a weekend retreat model.
Okay.
And so, excuse me, it's really dry in Indiana right now. But we get all different kinds of guys at all different stages that come and are looking for an answer. And so my answer is always a question. I can't help you if I don't know where you're at.
Wow.
If that if
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's a reminder that the healing journey is going to be different for everybody, and it's going to be like it's going to be a journey, like you're saying. Like, where are you at the journey in the journey? Um, I think just, from what I know of healing, sometimes I feel like the healing process can sometimes even be more painful than the start process. Like sometimes just I think that that takes a amount of courage as well to start that healing process of like, okay,
Hmm.
let's acknowledge what's happened, the grief that we're carrying, and kind of move forward from that. So I think that's really incredible to invite people into that process because I think it can be daunting and I think it can be it can be scary to try doing something that big, but that beautiful too.
But I think it's important for people to understand you're not looking at the journey of 1,000 steps. You're looking at the first one.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
you just take that first step. I could tell you about the 5 years I spent reading 37 some different books and all the hours and meetings and all the things. Maybe that seems like a lot, and maybe it is a lot, but in that moment, that day after that book study that night,
Mm,
I just did one thing. I
okay.
called my pastor.
Okay.
So you just you just do the first thing, and then, as my friend Paul says, then every day you just do the next right thing.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Um, I'm curious to hear how healing or how writing has tied into the healing process. I'm guessing writing has helped with some healing. I'm wondering too if for other creative people who um are trying to follow this path of writing, how does that healing and writing tie together?
That's a great question. And the reality is, again, like we started earlier with this conversation, we write what's true, right? Write
Yeah.
what you know. For me, the first novel was at the time I had three little kids. I was a fairly new Christian,
Yeah.
and that news story scared me to death. And so I wrote about it to kind of process those feelings, right?
Mhm.
It was healing for me. When I realized after abortion healing and all the things that I had a story to tell, writing that story was very healing for me. It was also very difficult. There
Yeah.
were nights I walked out of my office into the family room with my wife and I said, I got to stop for tonight because what I'm getting ready to do to Ben, I can't do tonight.
Oh.
Um, and and how do I say this? Well, I'm just going to say it. Ben's story is not my story, but there are parts of my story in Ben's story.
Okay.
And so in writing that down and writing the resolution and writing Ben's path to healing and restored relationship with God was incredibly healing for me. Um, and I also got to be playful in it a little bit. At one point in the book, Ben meets me,
Wait, what?
which is kind of funny.
It's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'll have to get you a copy of it. I was just feeling playful that night and I wrote myself into it. But So whatever is your thing, right? A friend of mine is she works with victims of human trafficking,
Wow.
and one of the young ladies has decided to write a novel about it.
Wow.
And so I was talking to this friend of mine who's a therapist, and I said, that is going to be such a hard, difficult, beautiful, healing book for her.
Wow.
If she never publishes it, it will be for her, right?
Yeah. Wow. I think that's very inspiring. Write the story you've been given is kind of a little bit what I'm hearing. Like that woman's writing that story. You wrote Ben's story, and it's kind of to me it really does seem like the Holy Spirit gives certain people stories, and it's like you got to write this. And whether you're saying like it's very healing for the person writing it, but I think it can also be healing for other people who are carrying that same grief and who
Hmm.
then find that they have a voice, somebody understands them, and there's this I don't know, there's something beautiful that they can look to that relates to their own story. So,
And that's the why. It's purpose in our pain. God didn't choose for me to do the things that led to unplanned pregnancy.
yeah.
That's not what God chose for my life.
Mm,
However, when I turned back to God, He said, okay, now we're going to use your story to help the next guy.
wow.
What does it say in the Bible, right? Freely you have received, so freely give.
Ooh, I
I
love
can
that.
share that grace with other people.
I love that. Where do you get the courage? I'm always like, sometimes I have I have stories. I'm always, yeah, inspired by people who share them that, like you're saying, just share them that freely. Is there where does yeah, how does the courage happen?
Um, I think part of it's that I'm a stubborn Scots-Irish. I don't know. But I don't know that for me personally that I would say it was courageous. It felt necessary.
Okay.
And when it feels necessary, like I
Yeah.
have to do this for my own benefit, if nobody else ever reads Almost Daddy, I got to write this story.
Yeah.
Um, then then it's just okay, whatever happens. Now, the other side of that is before I published it, I sat down with my wife and my sons and I said, look, this is, you guys know I've been working on this and there may be some backlash.
Yeah.
And are you guys cool with this? And because I was prepared to write it under a false name if it was going to negatively impact my family,
Okay.
um, they were all about it. And so
Wow.
I wrote it boldly and honestly. And in my mind, I always had the vision of there'd be arguments and there'd be people attacking me. I didn't expect the death threats, but those are fun. But I had in my mind a vision of the apostles preaching in this what second, third chapter of Acts, where they're just full of the Holy Spirit and they're like, I don't care what you think, I'm doing this. And at one point the Jewish leaders brought him before him and they said, quit doing that. And they flogged him and put him in prison and sent him away. And then the next day they're back in the temple courts preaching again. They're like, I don't care what they think. I'm doing what God told me. That's the attitude I think you have to have. It's not my courage, it's God's. And I just try to tap into that strength because I don't have any. I would prefer a life of luxury and you know what I mean? Have a nice big house and a nice car. Um, I chose this path based on what I believe God wants me to do with whatever time I got left.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. All right, so where can listeners follow you? Where can they follow your journey? And maybe is there another book we can look forward to coming out soon or anything like that?
Oh, you're going to be the first one. I'll talk about the book that's coming out first. So my father has one of the most interesting life stories of anybody I've ever known. He grew up in abject poverty. Both his parents were violent alcoholics. Ended up getting drafted into Vietnam.
Oh,
Got sober. When he died 4 years ago, he had 46 years of sobriety.
wow.
Um, it's just an amazing journey. And so at one point, Dad and I sit down over and over and over. And he told me his life story, which I notated. And he asked me if I would write a novel form of his life story.
Okay.
And I said, yeah. And he said, but wait till I'm dead to publish it. And I said, why? Well, I don't want anybody saying, well, that didn't happen that way or whatever. My dad had a wicked sense of humor. And I said, well, but if you're dead, Dad, I'll have to hear it. He's like, right, but I won't because I'll be dead. So when he died 4 years ago, it was after almost 2 years of declining with multiple strokes.
Mm.
And I knew when he died, I couldn't start writing it right away.
Right.
A couple of reasons. Number one, I had to get far enough away from the strokes to remember my dad as he was. Number two, I had to get far enough away from his death because it's natural when a parent dies, especially when you loved your parent, um, to kind of almost idolize them, right?
Mm.
And I couldn't write a true story, my dad's true story, until I was able to get settled enough emotionally through the grief process
Yeah.
to see him as he was,
Yeah.
right? Both the good and the bad. And so I this week have started organizing the notes, and I expect probably by his birthday, which his 81st birthday will be September 12th. I expect to have it published. It'll be called The Boy from Mill Creek. But there again, it's another book. It's a novel based on somebody's life, but it's about pain and healing and redemption and a path forward and how do we find God. Those are the things in life that interest me. And everybody's got a story that's of value. As far as connecting, you can go to gregmayoauthor.com or almostdaddy.com. Um, but there's contact forms on there and I respond pretty regularly. I'm on socials. Well, the only two I really interact on are Facebook and Instagram. I all the other I just don't. I'm
There's too
56. I don't
many.
want to be an influencer. Do what?
There's too many. They're like, oh, is your author platform? You need a TikTok. I was like, do I really need a TikTok? Because I don't think I can keep up. Um, there's so many platforms. So,
And it you're right. It's too much. I was on Twitter for a minute. Um, I got on TikTok for a minute because I'd done an interview
ooh,
and a buddy of mine sent me a screenshot from TikTok and he's like, dude, your interview, part of it's on TikTok and you've got over 1 million views. And I'm like, wow, I'll go check it out. But I don't like so I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Greg Mayo author on both of
yeah.
them. And there again, I interact in the DMs. I have people reach out to me in strange ways because of what I talk about. And here's the thing I really want to impress upon you and your listeners. I've been talking publicly about men and abortion for well over a decade.
Wow.
And every time, without fail, doesn't matter what kind of event I'm at, where I'm at, what part of the country, what part of the world, none of it matters. Two things always happen. The first one is a man, at least one, will come up and share his story for the first time. Um, I get the, hey man, I've never told anybody this, but when I was in high school, when I was in college, whatever. The other thing that happens every single time, somebody will come up to me and say, I never thought about the man.
Mhm.
So what I'm doing and what this work is about for me is getting to a place where I never hear that again,
Oh my God.
right? Well, I never thought about the man. We'll get there. There's a cultural battle that we have to wage. While I'm writing my dad's book, I'm teaching myself how to turn my novel into a screenplay,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
because it
That's,
needs to be a film.
yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited for that. I think one of the ideals, I guess, in my head, or one of the questions I've asked myself over and over again as a writer is what does it mean to tell the truth as a storyteller? Because like you're saying, like sometimes we're writing fiction, or often I write fiction, and it's like, what does it mean to tell the truth within that? And I feel like your books are an example of exactly what it means to tell the truth. So I really appreciate that of like bringing this truth into the story and sharing this voice. So yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would say to writers that are listening to this is, and part of it's a recap, but it's worth saying, and it's worth saying again, trust your own voice. Write what you think is true. And here's the thing, and I'll quote Richard Bach, one of my favorite authors, who was real big back in the 70s and 80s. It's okay, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's okay to write something today and not think it's true 10 years from now.
Mm.
It's okay to scribble on the page, right? Write what you know and what you feel and what's true today, and then allow yourself
Mm.
the freedom to let the story be the story. If you just trust that, you will get through whatever story it is you need to tell. 'Cause everybody has a story, and everybody's story is valuable, and everybody's story can help somebody. So just do it.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Greg.